Good afternoon. Is the mic working? Testing. I'm live.
You have it on?
It's always like a minute long, you know? It's not that it's live. It's not.
Okay. I don't want to start if the mic's not working, so I'm going to wait till it is. Oh. So this year is available for sponsorship. If anybody would like to have that opportunity, you can contact Reb Wolf or Rabbi. So in this week's Parsha, we have the birth of the Shvatim. Yaakov runs away from home to Haran, to Lavan's home, and he marries. Well, he tries to marry Rachel, but he marries first Leah, then Rachel, and then Bilhah and Zilpah as well. And he starts having his children. And as the children are being born, the mothers name their children, and Leah gives reasons in the pasuk for why she names her children with their names. So we're actually going to focus on her sixth and final son, Zvulun. So when she has her sixth son, she says, "Hapa'am yizableni ishi ki eladti lai shisha banim." Now my husband will dwell with me because I gave him 6 sons. So from the word yizableni, she gets the name Zvulun. Yizableni means dwell. And just some context for this is we know there was sort of a little bit of a rivalry between the wives of Yaakov, of where Yaakov is going to sort of make his permanent home. There seemed to be like a roster of sorts. Very strange concept for us right now. But last year we spoke about this a little more. I think the share is still up online. If you want to look at the third of the Bereshis origin stories series last year, we went a little bit more into what this means, the rivalry between Rachel and Leah. And maybe we'll touch on it a little bit later today. But basically, she's saying, okay, so now she gave him 6 sons. And they all knew that Yaakov was going to have 12 sons. They were prophetesses. They were Nevi'im. They knew that Yaakov was going to have 12 sons. And when she has 6, she knows that her amount of sons are equal to all the other wives. That's what Rashi explains. Why is she like so excited that now he's going to, maybe move with her permanently, that he's going to consider her the home base? Because she has the same equal to everyone else, exactly half of everyone else. And Rashi also emphasizes, he says, what does this mean? Yizableni comes from the word of base zvul. Base zvul is a term that is referred to the Beis Hamikdash, that the Beis Hamikdash was called a base zvul. And the term base zvul is contrasted to the name dira. Okay, dira is a home. But they say that a dwelling place, but Beis Zvul is considered to be a more permanent dwelling place. So dira can either refer to a permanent dwelling place or a temporary dwelling place. I'm renting a Airbnb for 2 nights. That's also a dira, right? It's the place where I'm staying. Or my home could be the dira. But when you say Beis Zvul, that means you're settled. It's your forever home, so to speak, right? So the Beis Zvul is this idea of a permanent dwelling place, that now it's this sort of cements, the fact that she has this 6th son cements her relationship with Yaakov. And obviously, if we're saying that this is his name, Zvulun's name, and specifically the concept that a name is an element of prophecy from the parent, that whenever we're naming a child, we receive Nevuah, a small dose of prophecy in choosing the name for the child. And even more so if we're talking about Leah, who is a Nevuah, right? She has prophecy in a much more revealed way. So obviously the name is not just reflective of her relationship with Yaakov, it also has to reflect who Zvulun is going to be. The name represents the essence of who someone is. My parents thought with their first kid, they thought, we want to have an easy time. So they gave me my name and that's it. No, there was no choice, right? But yeah, that's the name. My name is Zisi. It means sweet. So I don't know if it is actually my essence or it's somewhere very, very deep down somewhere inside, but the name represents your character and your personality. So there needs to be some sort of relationship with this idea of permanent dwelling, with a sense of permanent dwelling with Zevulun. It can't be she just named it as a reflection of her own relationship. It also needs to reflect the child, right? So, so something about Zevulun, not just something about the fact that he's her sixth son, but something about his nature as well, is what is going to pull Yaakov into her home, what is going to cement her relationship with Yaakov. An element of Zevulun's character is going to strengthen her relationship with Yaakov. Let's talk for a minute, though, about who Zevulun ended up being. Zevulun, like we said, the sixth of the Shvatim, he has a very interesting, unique role. It says about Zevulun l'chayf yamim yishkan, that Zevulun lives by the seashore, and he was involved with import and exports. Basically, the Shevet of Zevulun were business people. They ran the whole import and export. Their nachala, their portion in the land of Israel was by the sea. And they were the merchants. They ran all the shipping in and out of Eretz Yisrael. So yeah, their role was to be merchants. And it seems a little bit, if we're going to think about what is, so that's the sort of the line that defines Zevulun. When he's receiving his blessings from Yaakov before Yaakov's death, Yaakov says, Zevulun l'chayf yamim yishkan. That's sort of the definitive nature of Zevulun, that he's going to be this businessman. When we talk about Yaakov, if we need a descriptive line about Yaakov, Yaakov is called Ishtam Yeshev Ahalet, that he is a man that sits in the tent. What does that refer to? That refers to learning Torah. Being in the tent refers to learning Torah. And these seem to be two very opposite roles. We have the role of the guy who's the merchant, shipping out in the world, very worldly, constantly dealing with business. And then we have the role of Yaakov, who is sitting inside the tent. So they seem to be sort of veering away from each other. They don't really seem to be very similar types of personalities. Why is it that Zevulun is going to draw Yaakov into his mother's tent if he's going to be this businessman, which is so opposed to the person who's sitting and learning all day? Now, you might answer right away, what's the famous relationship with Zevulun? Yisachar, right? Zevulun is always paired with his brother Yisachar. Yisachar was a tribe that did sit and learn Torah all day. The entire tribe was involved in Torah study. And Zevulun and Yisachar were partners. Zevulun enabled Yisachar's Torah study by supporting Kevet Yisachar, and Yisachar sort of shared the merit of their Torah study with Zevulun. So even until this day, there's a concept which people will call a Yisachar-Zevulun partnership, where a business person will fund or will sponsor someone who's learning in Kollel all day. And then they share both the merit of their Torah study and the money from the business. And this way, one is able to be totally involved in Torah study, and one is able to make a living. So sort of splitting the role. It says in the blessings that the Shvatim receive at the end of the Torah, it says, Samach Zevulun b'tzeisacha v'Yisachar b'ahalacha, that rejoice, Zevulun, in your going out, and Yisachar in your staying in your tent. So we have these two opposite motions. Zevulun is constantly tzeisacha, going out, going on the sea, business, organization, all this stuff that's going on. Yisachar b'ahalacha, you're staying in your tent. And we preface, so if we think about it, right? Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun. So Yisachar is older than Zevulun. So shouldn't it say Samach Yisachar be'ahalacha v'Zevulun b'tzeisacha? Should Yisachar come before Zevulun? Why are we putting Zevulun before Yisachar? So the simple answer is that on a certain level, there's an advantage to the person who's enabling the Torah study over the person who's sitting and studying all day. That there's some sort of advantage to being able, it takes maybe an element of Mesiras Nefesh, where it's not as obvious that you're enhancing your relationship with Hashem, right? You're busy with all sorts of things all day. Your headspace is constantly out in the world. So the fact that you're coming back and still supporting Torah study is a bigger deal than the person who stays sheltered inside the tent all day. But then, still, if we think about this, we're trying to understand why Yaakov is being drawn into Leah's tent because of Zvulun. If Yaakov, who we talk about being his whole essence is Torah study, is he going to go to the person who's enabling the Torah, or is he going to go straight into the tent of Torah itself? You would think that it would be Yisachar who pulls him and not Zvulun. So we're still left with our question. So we're going to explore this a little bit. So when we analyze Yaakov's life, we're going to go to Yaakov a little bit to understand this whole concept. When we analyze Yaakov's life, we see that, yes, indeed, he spent a number of years learning Torah. The whole time in his youth, while he and Esav are growing up, it says that Yaakov is learning and Esav is hunting. So Yaakov is spending all this time learning Torah. And then even when he runs away from his father's house, he stops to learn before he goes to Lavan's house. He stops and he spends many years in the yeshiva of Shem and Eber. So he spends many years in the tent. But then once he gets to Lavan's house, what is he doing? He promises years of labor for his wives, right? He promised many years of labor for his wives. He ends up staying at Lavan's house for 20 years. That's 20 years without Torah, obviously he's maybe spending some time learning Torah, but 20 years where his primary responsibilities are in the field and raising his family there. That's where almost all of his Shvatim are born. Binyamin's born on the way, but the rest of his children are built. The rest of his children are born while he's in this state. He amasses a massive amount of wealth. He's extremely successful while he's in this state. It says that while he's at Lavan's house, it says that he expanded very, very greatly. Ma'id, very much. And the word ma'id is repeated. And we learn from this that he didn't only expand physically, that he had a physical expansion of his wealth, but even while he's in Lavan's house, he also expanded spiritually. It was also a time of great spiritual growth for him. And as you see, he's having all his children there. And Yaakov, unlike the other of our forefathers, Avram and Yitzchak, both have one child that sort of leaves the path, that is not representative of a Torah lifestyle. Avram has Ishmael, and Yitzchak has Esav. But by Yaakov it says mitase shlema. His bed is complete, and what that represents is that all of his children follow in his footsteps. So it's an interesting thing that you would think. When is a time that a person most naturally thrives is when they're in an environment where they're comfortable and they're living up to their internal, personality and potential. But meanwhile, Yaakov is thriving so immensely when he is in a place where it is not so in line with his personality, where maybe his personality would be to learn Torah all day, and instead now he's out working in the field. So it's a strange thing. How is he so successful when he is in Laban's house? In Haran, of all places, it says it was called Haran because Haran Apay Hashem, that the place made Hashem angry. That's why it was called Haran. It was a very lowly place. It wasn't a positive place. So how is he having all this spiritual success when he's in Haran? Why does he have this 20-year break where he's not learning Torah, where his sole lifestyle is not dedicated to learning Torah? And so it says that tzaddikim are a reflection of their creator. That a tzaddik, his life reflects what Hashem, sort of how Hashem is. And we know, so the next little thing that we're going to discuss, we've discussed many times. And so you're going to be familiar with this concept, but then we're going to take it even a step deeper. So don't think like, oh, hey, I know this already. We're going to take it deeper. So we know that Hashem, what does Hashem, why did Hashem create the world? Hashem desired to have a home in the lowest place. So Hashem didn't only want that the heavens should be aware of him, but Hashem wanted that earth, that in the physical world should be a reflection of God. Now, if you think about it, who is going to achieve this process more? The person who stays in the tent or the person who is out doing business? The person who stays in the tent, you can almost compare it to being in Gan Eden, right? Inside the tent, in the base medrash, is knowledge of God obvious? Yes, it's a given. You're only going to the base medrash if you're a believing Jew. And what are you dedicating your entire time there to? Learning Torah, studying Torah. So in the tent, it's as if you're in heaven. Where is the Tachtain? The Tachtain is the people who are engaging with the world. So Zevulun has the ability to mindfully interact with the world in a way that he can introduce godliness into all these different parts of the world. It says specifically that he's involved with imports and exports. So you can imagine that, taking imports and exports is about taking things, sending off things from here and receiving things from all over the world. So what does that mean? That means he's conquering the world through his business by infusing it with a godliness, by infusing his business with a mindfulness of Hashem, by doing his business in an ethical and moral and halachic way, by speaking about thanking God, by making sure to make a kiddush Hashem while he's doing business, by using all of his money, and technically speaking, he uses money, like we said before, to support Yisachar. First of all, that means that all the profits are then going to support Torah study. These are all ways where he's expanding the reach of godliness into all the lower places. So he's able to reach the spaces outside the tent of Torah. And so this is what we're saying when we say Samach Zevulun b'Teisecha b'Yisachar b'Alacha. Zevulun comes first because there's an advantage to b'Teisecha, to going out, rather than just staying inside our insular, padded, safe, holy spaces. There's an advantage to going out. Now, obviously, each person has their own avaita, and Yisachar exists as well, and it's so important to have people who are completely and totally immersed in Torah study all day, and who do therefore gain the mindset of Torah and such a they live and breathe it all the time, and they're able to advise the people who are going out. They act sort of as an anchor for the people who are going out, that you can then come back and speak to those people who haven't gone out, and therefore your own spiritual self is reinvigorated. You can't just be constantly going out and never coming back to your source. But there's an advantage to the one who goes out. There's an advantage to the person who goes out into the world. In Shema, every single day, we say V'asafta degenecha, that you should gather your grain. And there's a debate in the Gemara. Rabbi Yishmael says, so the Torah basically seems to be commanding us to work in the fields. So Rabbi Yishmael says, yes, every person needs to have an occupation, that you learn Torah and you also work in the world. That's part of being in the world, and that's part of making a difference. He doesn't say this literally, but is that you go out into the world and you have an occupation and you combine it with your Torah study. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, no, you perform Hashem's will, and other people will take care of gathering the grain. You're not the one who needs to gather the grain. And the Gemara goes on to say, many people did like Rabbi Yishmael, and they were successful. And those who did like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were not successful. In other words, it's saying, no, don't just think, oh, I'm going to leave the world to the other people and I'm just going to focus on my insular Torah existence. There is a necessity to go out into the world for most people. And we find that right now, in maybe when the Beit HaMikdash was around, it was still a very agricultural society and many people were working. But as we get closer to Mashiach, we see that where are most people spending the majority of their day? There are obviously still people who are learning in Kollel and who spend their entire day immersed in Torah study, but the majority of the Jewish people are not doing that. The majority of the Jewish people are involved in the world, in the broader world, either through business or other things. We are involved in the physical world. And this is partly because what are we working towards? We're working towards creating a home for Hashem over here. And what do we call it when we actually achieve that home down here? We call that Mashiach, right? When the Dir B'Tachtonim is actually accomplished, we call that Mashiach. That Hashem's home is here, that's when Mashiach comes. But then we still have a question. What did we say Zvulun accomplishes? Zvulun accomplishes what we call that his Avaida, for some reason, creates the permanent home. So we understand that he is what is enabling there to be a permanent home eventually, right? Where Hashem will be down here in an obvious way. We'll have the third Beis HaMikdash, which will be the most permanent Beis HaMikdash. But once that is accomplished, what happens to the Avaida of Zvulun? It's no longer going to be necessary. When Mashiach comes, are we going to need to be involved with the world? Not really. When Mashiach comes, that's like the whole point. We're working now to refine the world. Then once it's all refined, there isn't going to be this Avaida of needing to go out and refine. It's going to be, that job is going to, it's like a job that can be completed. It will be done. So what happens to, how can we say that Zvulun is the key to the eternal home, that his Avaida has a connection to eternity? It seems to be that it is only for a certain time, and then it will be over. Is that a good question? So refining the world is temporary. Torah is forever. So you would think that, no, it's Yisachar again who's enabling there to be a permanent dwelling place for Hashem. So, okay. How does this work? So the Rambam explains something very interesting about the advantage of a Baal Tshuva over a tzaddik, over someone who doesn't sin. The Rambam says the advantage of the Baal Tshuva is Ta'am tam hachet, that he tastes the taste of sin, upirish mimenu, but he separates himself from it, v'kavesh yitzray, and conquers his Yetzer Hara. So the Baal Tshuva is someone who has sinned, and he knows what sin tastes like. He knows the experience of temptation. He's very familiar with temptation. And yet, what does he do? And he's experienced the pleasure of giving into the temptation. And yet, he's able to overcome that and kovesh es yitzray, not do it again. So let's say for me, keeping kosher is not a big deal because I've never tasted non-kosher foods. But for someone who grew up their whole life eating non-kosher foods, they had the convenience of eating non-kosher food wherever they went. They had maybe the advantage of certain tastes. For them to then start eating kosher is a much bigger deal. So we always think about that sort of on a simple level. Of course, it's a bigger deal because they give up that which is negative and they align themselves with that which is positive. But the Rambam takes it a step deeper. He says that because he's tasted the taste of sin and has then conquered it, he has security for all of the future that he will be able to conquer his desires. A person who lives a temptation-free life, who has never tasted the temptation, does not have the security to know that when he is met with temptation, he's not going to give in. So it's only the person who has already pulled on who has already needed to access the level of self-control that knows that they have self-control. The person who's grown up in an environment where they never needed to access self-control, who's never had any desire, is not going to know that when the big thing comes up for them, that they're going to be able to conquer their desire. So the tzaddik doesn't know that, maybe until now, he hasn't been met with any desire until now. But How do you know that in the future there won't be a desire that comes up that will really tempt you and that you're going to be able to overcome it? So what enables the Baal Tshuva to be able to say that I am permanently going to conquer sin is only through the fact that he failed once and then access the superpower strength to overcome that failure and to recommit himself to God. And therefore, he knows that he has it inside of him. He knows that he has this ability to conquer his Yetzer Hara, to conquer his evil inclination inside of him. And we can apply this to our situation over here. Torah learning is eternal, right? Like we said, Torah learning is eternal. But for the person who learns Torah the entire day, it's not such a big deal for him that he continues learning. And when Mashiach comes and he's going to continue learning Torah, you can say he's almost continuing on the same level as Gullus learning. It's just like this continuation of his lifestyle, right? Until now he's been learning Torah, and then when Mashiach comes, he'll continue learning Torah. It's going to be a new Torah, but that's the point over here is because you're always in the positive and your mind has been in this positive space, even with the new Torah, what creates the fact that it's a new Torah? What creates the fact that it's a new Torah is Zevulun. Because all the time during Gullus, Zevulun has needed to access his inner strength to, let's say, for someone in Zevulun to make time in the morning, to wake up at 5 o'clock. There are people who wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to a minyan and shir before they go to their jobs. That's accessing a very deep inner strength. The fact that he took a portion of his money, his hard-earned money, and gave it to someone else, that accesses a much deeper place. So it's specifically through his avodah during the Gullus that he brings that with him into his Torah study that's going to happen when Mashiach comes. And that's what gives his Torah study when Mashiach comes this extra depth and eternal nature. The fact that it's coming after, right? Like the Baal Tshuva, he's been there, he's been in the world, and still he's able to return into a life of Torah study. That takes a strength, that takes a tapping into your own essential neshama that the Torah scholar doesn't get to access. There's a number of interesting, there's a letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote to different businessmen who are bemoaning the fact that they don't have so much time to learn, and they feel like even when they have time to daven or learn, it's obviously not with the same depth that the person who's learning all day is able to accomplish. And then also in Parshas Noach, in the famous Maimer, Mayim Rabim, the Alter Rebbe talks about how the waters of the flood is like the worries about making a living, and how they come into you and totally overwhelm your consciousness. And how do you save yourself from the flood? You go into the teva. What is the teva? The teva is words of davening. Teva literally means words, right? That's teva is also means word. It means a teva and it means words. So you enter into the words of davening and learning. So the businessman who's constantly being barraged with worries about making a living, and his headspace is so removed from godliness, how do you save yourself from being completely flooded out? Is you make the time, you make the space to then enter into the words of davening. But what happens when you enter into the words of davening? What happens when you're in the flood and you go into the boat? What happens to the boat as the waters rise? The boat rises, right? So as the water rises, the boat rises as well. And what that represents is the waters, like we said before, are the worries of Parnasa. It's not just that you can still learn, but no, the worries of making a living and the fact that you've had forced yourself to remove yourself from that constant barrage, that you've forced yourself, you've dug into your inner strength to make a space of peace and tranquility by going into Torah and Tefillah, makes your Torah and Tefillah go even higher. So it's not just that, okay, now you're learning. It's that your business has elevated your learning. The fact that you are interacting with the world then elevates the fact that you're involved in the physical world, then elevates your spiritual service. Because the power that it takes to refocus and the place that it forces you to reach inside yourself, to reconnect to Hashem on a deeper level, despite the fact that your whole day is being spent with things that are not godly, will then elevate your tefillah to an even higher level, will elevate your davening to an even higher level. So I think the message for us is that even if all day long we're busy with so many things, whether we're busy with things for our children or for ourselves or for work or things that don't necessarily always seem to be spiritually related. So step number one is that you need to make the time for your spiritual self-care, so to speak. That is necessary. You need to make that time. You can't use the fact that, oh, it's not worth it anymore, or what is, I'm too busy or whatever. It's necessary to make that time, to create that tiva, to create that space for davening and learning as well, whether it's on Shabbos, when you're forced to go away from your business anyway, or if you can, even daily, make sure that you have time, that you set aside time where you enter into this headspace of holiness. But then also recognizing that that time that you set aside is not worth any less than the person who gets to sit and daven all day, than the person who is involved in spirituality all day. If anything, the fact that you've managed to take a break from everything that's been consuming you, and the fact that you have been down in the darkness and now you're lifting yourself up, it elevates your parents feel even higher, and it gives it a certain level, like we said before, of eternity. It doesn't only make your Torah and tefillah be eternal, but it brings a level of eternity to your entire life, because your entire life is all synchronized and is all for expressing one thing. Your physical life is going to express godliness, and your spiritual life is going to be empowered by all the work that you've done in the physical world. It goes both ways. And then your entire life is an everlasting beis zvul, an everlasting eternal home for Hashem in yourself. So yeah, we should all be able to accomplish this with everything that is constantly going on in the world. I think that we can use that also as an example of this, that there's constantly distractions, and we're like living in a world where we don't want to go away from checking the news every minute or things like that. That's the distraction. And we need to force ourselves to create that space, to create that teva within the distraction, to create that space of tranquility as well. Yes, and we should reach a place where we see this in a revealed way, where it doesn't have to be hard to do it, where it's easy to do it.
Thank you.